one author, and she's very popular. And she's one of those women who's like every moment counts, and she's churning her own butter, looking out in the horizon with her like 6 homeschooled kids. And I'm like, I am a failure. I suck.
Now we're talking.
Wes, what up?
Hey, we are here.
We're in your turf, man.
We're in the City of Angels.
Yeah,
We're here.
And this is gonna be good. You're a church planner here in the LA area, but you're from Seattle.
Yes.
Yeah, and so
Kind of.
Okay.
And sorry, I probably should have told you before. So originally from Southern California, but I lived in Seattle for like half my life.
Oh, amazing.
And then
now you're back.
Now I'm back. We just felt the call to pay the higher taxes, all that stuff.
Come on. Amazing. Now, okay, so walk us through this a little bit. So you were actually at what formerly known as City Church, now Church Home, for quite a long time. So let's just kind of start there, and we can kind of get into the LA, and then kind of go from there.
Okay, so when I was in high school at a little school, you would probably know it, Mountain Lake Terrace High School.
Yeah.
So Mountain Lake Terrace High School, and a friend of mine's like, "Hey, you got to come check out this youth ministry," and I was like. I just started serving God, and this is before Google, so hopefully I'm dating myself a little bit. So this would have been about 98, 99.
Okay.
And someone's like, hey, you gotta come find this. And so I had literally, this is back when I had to pray, God, send me a church and send me friends, because there's no social media, and there's no Google, and no one had a website, and so I was like, God, send me friends, send me a church. And so I met a friend at school, and he became one of my best friends throughout all of high school and college.
Yeah.
And the Spingaths, and I love them so much to this day. He invited me to a church and also introduced me to a group of friends. But one of the Christians at my school was like, hey, you got to go to this youth ministry. And I was like, cool. And so they just told me roughly where it was at. And so I went to like and actually it was at a small like Presbyterian church. There's like 40 kids there. One of the staff members from, at that point, the City Church was there preaching. He's preaching his guts out. There's like 40 kids in the room.
Yeah.
And like no one's amening. Like I was kind of, I think at that point, maybe amening.
Yeah.
And his name is Davis. And I talked to him afterwards. I was like, man, I've never heard preaching like this. Like someone's passionate. They believe the Bible. He's like, you got to come to our church. And it was the same one that my friends have been telling me about. I'm like, no way. I got to come check this out. And so he gave me directions, and
you were like, amen, and then they're like, you belong at City Church.
Yeah.
You're an amener.
Yeah, you're an amener.
I know your type.
Yeah.
We're
the same.
Yeah, you don't belong here with these Presbyterians. You belong at City.
No,
bring your amen.
Not quite.
Come on.
But anyway, so I connected with him and said, hey, come now. So check this out. So I'm driving down the freeway and down the 405. And I get off on 132nd, and if you get off on 132nd from the north, it says, for Kirkland you had this way, for Redmond you had that way, and so for those watching, it's like it's just right or left, and so I didn't know which way to go, so I was like, why, the church is in Kirkland, and so I went down and I drove down the road for about 2 miles, and I hit a lake. There was like, it ends. And I was so discouraged. I'm like, God, I just drove like 35, 40 minutes to find this church I felt like you wanted me to go find. And the sun's out. People are putting their boat in the water on Lake Washington. And I was like, I said, all right, God, I'm going to ask this one guy, that guy. I'm going to ask him if he knows where this church is at. Otherwise, I was so discouraged. I said, otherwise, God, I'm just going home.
Yeah.
So like, hey, so I get out of my car. The guy's putting his boat in the water Wednesday night. Because I'm like, hey, have you ever heard of this church called the City Church, a Generation Church? Have you ever heard of this? And he goes, yeah, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go back down this road and you're going to turn left. And I'm like, what church is this that on a Wednesday night, someone who's not even going to church, they're putting their boat in the water, they know where I'm not going to church, but I know where you can find church. And from that day on, I never stopped going to that church. That became the church where I met my wife, where I was licensed as a pastor, where our first son was born.
Wow.
And everything else, like major, happened in my life. Just incredible prophetic words from God. It all happened at that church. And so we were there for I was about 16, 17, and that was our church until I was 31.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. Now, hey, walk us through. So I actually attended City Church for a while.
Oh, no way.
So the interesting time when my parents actually went through a divorce in the late 90s. My dad resigned the church where I was raised. So on Sundays I would go to City Church with my dad. So my dad and Wendell were good friends, and so I'd go with my dad on Sundays, and then I'd go with my mom to other churches. So I was kind of back and forth between City and just other kind of church hopping kind of that whole thing. And then on Wednesday nights, I would attend Generation Church, and I would just a weird time, like kind of going through this time of brokenness, and it's kind of sneaking into the back row. In the I think it was in the gym there. And it's just kind of just being there, but I always so appreciated City Church, and also appreciate actually the size, because what I didn't want to do is go to a small youth group where you walk in and everyone's like a new guy. I didn't want to be
come all around
seen
you,
or
pick you up on a chair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I haven't been back to any of their environments since that time. Yeah. So what kind of now church home? It's revolutionizing just the landscape of the church, right? And so what was that like, going from that transition from Pastor Wendell to Pastor Judah? Because it seemed like it was such an honor centered, and I even think of just like Pastor Judah's installation. I know like Casey Treat was there, Mark Driscoll was there, like all these different kind of generals at that time in Seattle were there to really kind of, so walk us through kind of like that whole transition, what that was like, being in the church and watching this handing off of the baton and everything.
Yeah, so when I first started coming, it was one church, one location, 2 services, a fairly large youth ministry. I think at that point it's maybe like 300-ish, and then it continued to grow well beyond that. But you kind of see like this trajectory that God has, not only at church but also people. Mm-hmm. And I honestly kind of felt like Ruth just happening into Boaz's field.
Wow.
Because I'm like, I don't come from a ministry family.
Yeah.
Like my dad's a retired teacher here in LA.
Okay.
Like my mom, my parents are divorced as well. My mom lives up in Seattle, and she's had a couple different great jobs. She's loved people, but my dad's a first-generation Christian. My mom's a first-generation Christian. No one in my family had ever been in ministry, so I didn't learn. I just wanted to follow Jesus. But it was because of that environment and that church that I learned this is how, not just learning ministry, but this is how you follow God.
Wow.
This is how you follow God. And I was taught how to pray in that church. Yeah. I was taught how to read my Bible in that church. I knew I needed to, but no one ever sat down and go, hey, Wes, here's how we're going to pray.
Wow.
Here's how we're going to read our Bible.
That's right.
So much of my discipleship and learning has come from not just from that church, but from the people of that church. And so I'm forever grateful for Pastors Wendell and Jenny, and for Pastors Judah and Chelsea, and Jude and Becky. And there's so many other incredible ministers and people who have come out of that church. And so seeing that progression, like there's so much honor in that culture.
Yeah, for sure.
Everyone's human,
right?
But the Bible talks to us about honoring, and it also says that those who preach and teach are worthy of double honor. So, in this world that we live in, where people don't honor, and people who are in positions of authority aren't honorable as well, that there's no honor. So when people see honor, they're kind of like taken back, or even double honor. They're like, "Oh my gosh, this is too much." When in fact, it's like, "Hey, we're worshiping God,
right?
But man, we honor the heck out of people.
That's awesome.
We are so grateful for these people, and so." I just, Pastors Wendell and Jenny, they just incredible mark on my life. And so Pastor Jenny is an elder at our church.
Oh, is she really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
So we actually talk quite a bit. I talked to her maybe 2 days ago.
Oh, that's
We're just
awesome.
kind of talking about, here's some thoughts on outreach. And I was just running some ideas past her. Just incredible wealth of knowledge and ministry and heart and wisdom.
That's awesome.
And so as for Pastors Jude and Chelsea, also serving them and serving in that youth ministry, I was watching something last night, like a documentary, and I was watching them bus hundreds and thousands of people. And I turned to my wife, I kid you not, I turned to my wife and I go, do you remember when we did a youth camp with over 1,000 students? I'm watching this documentary of governments doing this, and I'm like, as a youth ministry, like Pastors Judah and Chelsea led this thing.
Sounds terrifying.
Thousands of students
Thousands
on
of students.
buses and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, there's an incredible anointing on them. And so I love them. And I'm so incredibly honored that just some kid from a family that no one knew and no ministry background to speak of, that they literally, is like God places the lonely in families, and God placed me in that family and had an incredible mark on me, which is why I believe so much in the local church.
That's awesome.
So much in the local church.
Yeah, that's so cool. So at what point did you feel like God was calling you into pastoral ministry? Because so you're a church planner here in LA.
Yeah.
But is this your first time being kind of a lead guy of a church? Is that right?
Yeah, this is my first time leading something, which is, it's totally funny because like when you lead it, you go, oh man, all the times like I had strong opinions as a number two,
Totally, yeah.
I'm so much more merciful to all the people, because it's like, oh, once you're in the seat, you get it.
Yeah.
But I had so many also great opportunities being a part of that church where they would say, hey, Wes, you're going to lead this now. Wes, you're going to go do this. Hey, Wes, you're going to help. So this is not the first time I've helped with the plant.
Yeah, okay.
Because there was a point where my pastors then, where Judah and Chelsea and Wendell and Jenny, they go, hey, you're going to go help this church as their number two, as their associate, as their youth, to go plant this church
Wow.
in
Awesome.
Aberdeen, Washington.
Really?
And so,
Yeah.
And so I was 25.
Home of Kurt Cobain.
Yeah, home of Kurt Cobain,
Yeah.
Nirvana.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
and this great church that we got to help too. But they had given us so many opportunities. But thank God that I said yes. Because they said, hey, you're going to go do this, but you have to say yes. But that opportunity prepared me for the next opportunity that God had.
Wow.
And so, yeah.
Yeah. So what did this look like as far as God calling you to LA to plant a church?
So coming back to LA for us, because my wife was actually born here in LA. All of her family's all from here in LA. My dad was born in Santa Monica.
Okay.
And so like locals in that sense. But I had never lived in LA because my dad took a job just about an hour north, and that's where I was born. And then my parents split, and I went to Seattle and was kind of back and forth.
Okay.
But we had felt this call while we're in Seattle of like, I think we're supposed to go back to LA. And it was the scariest thing because it was so much family.
Wow.
And so I would have, if everyone's getting face tattoos on staff, I probably would have.
Yeah.
Because it's like, hey, we're in this, and people say, drinking the Kool-Aid, whatever, but it's like, man, we're going after God and we want to make an impact in our city. So, and we're doing this together.
Yeah.
And so when God started stirring that in our heart, it was almost like, I was like, I don't know what to do with this feeling. And so,
interesting.
And so it had been coming, and it was just confirmed. And so God moved some things, and so we moved down here, and then we're like, okay, we're here in the city. What are we supposed to do? And it wasn't like go to LA, plant a church. It was like we're supposed to go to LA. And it was like, and nothing at that point was really happening when we had originally felt that there was.
And now, when was this? When God spoke to you about
this? Would have been about. I'm going back to, it's about our third year in marriage, and we were married in 2008, so 2011.
Okay.
That's when we started feeling this, going like, we're supposed to be in LA.
Interesting.
And that's when we were helping out at the plant. And then at that point we said, okay, God, the only way that we will go back to Seattle is literally, we'll put this fleece out, is if Pastors Judah and Chelsea call us and say, hey, would you come back and help with the youth ministry? We literally gave God like this tiny little target, and we're like, we're going to take a couple weeks off, we're going to pray and fast, we're going to go on vacation. And 2 weeks into that time, literally I get a text from his assistant, hey, can you meet up with Pastor Judah and Chelsea? I'm like, yeah. And it was a crazy thing because we gave this tiny little target. And they're like, hey, would you come back, from the plant to the site, do this and this, and it was literally everything that we just asked of the Lord. Wow. And so I remembered, I was like, yeah. And they're like, you don't want to ask any other questions? I was like, no. Like I've already talked this up with God.
That's incredible.
And so, but LA was still in our heart. And so when the time came for us to come down here, we moved down here, and we're here. And honestly, we were here for about 6 months, 5 months, just like going to the beach. We had a 1-year-old boy at that time,
awesome.
praying, road trips. and going, God, what do you want us to do? And we actually had a ministry opportunity in Orange County, which all the locals here know that LA and Orange County are two different cities. But if you're outside of the city, it's like, it's all the same. It's like very different. Very, very different cities. And it was such a cool opportunity, but I had to say no, because it's like, and so I told this incredible national leader, if I said their name, you'd be like, wow, that's great.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, I'm so sorry. Like, I would love to say yes, but we actually feel compelled to be in this city.
Wow.
Like, we feel called to be here. And so, so that just began this love affair in my wife and I's heart for the city, even more of like, we actually feel called that we will say no to opportunity to say yes to the call of God.
Awesome. Yeah. Hey, pull the mic in just a little bit. Yeah, perfect. Voila. Awesome. Hey, okay. All right. So, it is kind of funny just this talk about moving from Seattle to LA, because it feels like there's an active exodus right now from Seattleites moving to LA. We've seen it in our own church. People just like the Lord just calling them.
Do they lead a church here in LA?
Not to lead a church, but to come here for various reasons. And then just in the last 2 days, just having these conversations about what Jesus is doing in LA. It feels like revival is in the air here, but the packaging is different, and so I think that people that have this understanding of like these people that have like I think people's grid for revival is getting kind of broken and shattered, and maybe even a little triggered, because what God is doing is a new thing. He hasn't done it before, and it's perhaps more hip than it's ever been, in its expression, and it's really interesting what Jesus is doing here, and it's really exciting, and so you're right in it. How many years has your church been going now for?
We're in the months.
Oh, months.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So we're about 9 months in since our official launch. And so that's
incredible. 9 months. That's a good amount of time.
So 9 months, and some of the guys are here who, for the 9 months previous to that, we just did like a team building in our house. And we grew from our house to the backyard. We tell the story all the time. We grew from the house to the backyard.
So it's like part of that explains the name.
Yeah. Well, no, the name actually, I was on a walk with our kids, and I was just not praying. I was just like trying to keep them keep them on the sidewalk, And I'm like pushing my cart, the cart that my daughter's in. My son was on his little scooter, and I just feel the Lord, clear as I'm hearing you, call at the house. Yeah. And I go, and I remember like looking up and like to the side, going, "Wait, what?" Call at the house, and instantly I could see my wife and I in a room, saying, "Welcome to the house. Our prayer is that the house would become a home for many people."
Wow.
And to this day, every time an MC gets up at our church, they say, "Welcome to the house. Our prayer is that this house would become a home for many people."
Oh, that's incredible.
And
that's beautiful.
And so, that was part of it. But as far as the I would just call like the prophetic swirl around us starting this church. Like I keep going back to that, going, God, this church was your idea.
Yeah.
This is the success of this is on you.
Yeah.
The glory of this goes back to you.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Okay, so you're in 9 months. So how's it going? Like, what's it like to plant a church in downtown LA?
Yeah, it's incredible. And LA it's a big city. Mm-hmm. It's a very diverse, it's a melting pot. And I feel like it's one of the key cities on the planet. Definitely one of the key cities here in America. One of the key cultural cities. It's not the capital of our state, but it could be literally one of the capitals of our country.
Wow.
Like you have a few hub cities that are like that.
Sure.
New York definitely is a big piece of that. So you have here in California, you have Sacramento, that's our legislative capital, but cultural capital is Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
Bar none. Yep. And so there's millions of people here. And so we're 9 months in, and it's so exciting. It's so incredible. There's so many opportunities for faith. And so there's opportunities of faith of like, there was at one point where we were leasing out the space because we felt like this last summer we were supposed to do worship nights. And so we bring in a bunch of friends, like Chris Kilala comes in one night, our mutual friend Sarah Emerson, she comes leads worship one of the nights. Brian and Katie Torwald come in one of the nights.
Awesome.
A couple other friends, a friend from Upper Room comes in one of the nights. One of our family members from an AG church out of the area, just incredible worship. He comes out one of the nights, and then the time came where we had to flip. Okay, hey, we got to go back to Sundays because we did Wednesdays only for the summer, which is kind of like,
that's cool. That's
okay,
really cool.
this is what we're supposed to do.
Right.
Like, Lord, and we were 10 days away from being homeless. And so people kept asking me, hey, Pastor Wes, where are you going to go? And I'm just smiling like, I'll let you know soon. I'll let you know soon. I'll let you know soon.
It's so ironic, too, that the church name is
The House.
The House.
And we were about to be homeless.
Yeah.
And so I would joke, it's like, hey, I've never had a heart for the homeless and the displaced in all my life. Like, because we're right on the cusp. But God opened up this great door for us to partner with this Lutheran church. And they said, hey, you guys can be here on a Sunday. We have an early service. You guys can come in right after us. And so the fleece that I'd kind of put out before the Lord there was like, okay, here's the 2 requests that I'm going to ask. I want to park our church trailer in your parking lot, and I never want to move it. I want to leave it there all the time.
Yeah.
All of our stuff. Storage unit. It's not moving. It's there. They said, no problem. I said, secondly, I want to set up our sound system on your stage, right next to your sound system, and I'm going to leave it set up because our team was setting up, tearing down every single week. And I was like, and I just want to give our team a break, but also for quality control. You're not having to every week EQ up the room.
Sure.
And they said, yeah, no problem. And I'm like, this is incredible. So we've had so many different things like that.
That's awesome.
And then here's the craziest thing. They handed me keys to their building. Like, all right, I signed the lease. Like, all right, great. Here's the key to the front door. Here's your alarm code. And I'm like, wait, you're giving us access to everything. And so we have kids' classrooms. And so it's been an incredible journey of like, God, and my wife and I have had this line, we don't know what's going to be next, but we know it's going to be good.
That's
we
awesome.
don't know what's going to happen next, but we know it's going to be good.
That's good. And it feels like there's a similarity between LA and Seattle in that there's like this spiritual openness.
Yeah.
Like it feels like the playing field would be pretty level when it comes to spirituality. Probably not religion.
Yeah.
Right. So there'd be probably this allergic reaction to anything that has too much dogma or too much structure.
Yeah.
But an openness to general kind of spirituality and experience, very experienced probably based. And so what I'm wondering is how is the gospel being received? And how are you, what does it look like to invite people into a relationship with Jesus while also inviting people to lay down their other idols, and I know that idolatry is such a large conversation. It can encompass so many things, so many good things. But it's a very fascinating conversation that we're having right now that they weren't having in the 80s, right? Like in the 80s, you were like a moron if you believed in anything spiritual. It was like such a humanistic kind of philosophical, But with this kind of weird thing that postmodernism has given birth to, this very kind of, at least here on the West Coast, this openness. So with your own kind of philosophical approach to missiology and theology and what you're kind of doing here, what does that dynamic look like, and what are some of the things that you're running into that are catching you off guard, and so if we could kind of dive into that, I think that'd be fascinating.
That's a great question.
And that's a conversation I can have with you that perhaps I wouldn't be able to dive into with some of our other guests. Just because of your ministry experience, and so.
I think that's a great question, and I think that based upon someone's background and age, it's different. So for the younger generations, for those, maybe even 40 and younger, which depending upon how you kind of delineate your generations, the millennials, some would say that those are the people approaching now 40 and below, and then on down further. For the older generations, in my experience, my limited experience, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. From the younger ones, it's relational is going to win huge. Community wins huge. The fact that you're actually doing something good in the community, that is huge.
Okay.
And so they may buy into your community long before they'll buy into your doctrine.
Okay.
And so one of my favorite salvation stories, I got the guy's amen here.
Yeah, that's
that's
awesome.
good.
Hey, shut up. We're trying to do a podcast. You brought your community here to do the podcast.
Yeah, it's like, guys, we're going on a drive. Let's go party.
Not your whole community,
No. But I lost my train of thought there. But as far as they will buy into that before, one of my favorite salvation stories is C.S. Lewis. And so if anyone knows C.S. Lewis' story, is he talks about his moment of salvation as, because everyone talks about moment. For him, he says it was a journey. But it says that he was in this on a motorcycle with his brother. And he said, I started to drive not as a Christian, and I ended the drive as a Christian. It was just like on this journey, he just goes, okay, I'm a Christian.
That's amazing.
Now, for you and I, for others, like we have raise your hand, repeat after me. We have like moments. Like, how do you know? Did you actually fill out the card? Like, we have these other metrics. But what I'm seeing is that other people, they're kind of like coming along in a story. Like, they will show up for an outreach opportunity. They'll show up to one of these guys' connect groups. They'll show up to a coffee shop. They'll show up to basketball, and they will slowly find themselves coming in. And yes, they have this moment of a revelation of Jesus as their Messiah, as their forgiver, as their Savior. But it doesn't, for some of them, it doesn't start there. It starts as a community. It starts as an outreach. It starts as I can buy into that story. They go, man, I can buy into that story. And so we don't take away the gospel. I'm not telling people, hey, we'll talk about Jesus later.
Sure.
It's just that they happen to enter into the story from a different position than other people in the past.
Absolutely. So
for some of our older generations, they come to our community, they enter in through a service. So for all the people that are in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, they come on a Sunday, and then they work in the community. For the younger generation, they're starting with community.
Interesting.
And they're working their way into
And what
a
does
Sunday.
that look like?
So this last Sunday, 2 girls came to our church for the very first time, and I just happen to know these 2 stories because my wife and I talked to them after service. Yeah. And I was like, hey, how'd you hear about our community? And guess what? It was social media. Both of them happened to be through Instagram.
Really?
Which I was like, what? Okay. Like, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad that this happened. But Instagram is not just, like, if it was Twitter's more information.
Yeah, right.
Instagram is like this community. It's this connection. It's like I get a picture into your world of what's going on. But they came in through that. And so there's other people, like some of the guys who are here, they're telling me the story. They're hanging out, they're at someone's birthday party, and one of the guys at the birthday party is like, where are you guys all from? They're like, oh, we all go to this church called the House LA, blah, blah, blah. He's like, man, how do I get to be a part of that? How do I get to be a part? And so what happens, in one of our worship leaders, that's how she joined our church. She went out with my wife and a bunch of the girls. They were going out to this place here called Italy. And it's just like a restaurant. And so they're all out there. And she's like, wait, what are you guys all talking about? She's like, what? I want to be a part of that.
Interesting.
And she is in that millennial crew. And so they start with that community, which is so powerful. Why, like, how powerful community is. And so I know as preachers and as leaders, we often look at our service as like our chief thing.
Totally.
But the power of community. The power of community. Think about, like, I have a cousin that, I can't say the country now because I have a cousin who helps do mission work in a country that's not free. It's probably the best way I could say that. They don't have Sunday services. All they have is community. And so we're not anti-gathering. We love I celebrate our gatherings, but we all come. It's Thanksgiving. You can't miss Thanksgiving, man.
Right.
I got your place setting right here. But that's not the entirety of who we are as a community.
Yeah, and community is an interesting word because it can be so relative.
Absolutely.
In that, like, perhaps what I would call community, other people would be like, yeah, that ain't community at all. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, like, there's a desire for community, but there's a desire for different levels of community. And I also wonder how millennials are defining community and how that differs from, like, perhaps even like the older generation. I mean, even this idea, even like if we were to talk about social media as a form of community, that would probably really trigger some of the moms and pops because they would be like, no way, it's community in name only. It's like it's digital.
Yeah.
A lot of people are still really wrestling with this idea of how real can something be if it's digital.
Yeah.
And versus we're seeing like a generation get married right now because of apps. Right, so it's becoming pretty real.
Yeah.
Right, but for you, so there's always kind of a question behind the question. For the house LA and this environment of Jesus lovers that are transforming the city, right? What does community look like? Is it really just like these organic, like people just hitting each other up and hey, let's just go hang out, or are these catalyzing events being created from the mothership,
right?
Like how organizational is it as far as these community opportunities versus organic,
right? And it reminds me of I was reading this book by N.T. Wright, and he was talking. He was using like a parable to describe essentially the Christian life.
Yeah.
And he talked about how there was, and uses the word community. There was this community that needed water, and they decided, hey, do we pipe this all in, and it's completely dependent upon the pipe, or do we kind of like let this run free, and then everyone gets all the water that they want, but sometimes it creates mess.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I often think about that as community because you want it to be organic, but also you want it to be safe.
Yeah, it's true.
So I want, like, let's say it's my son who's going to a group. I want to make sure that leader loves the Lord, and he or she, they're not going to lead them, introduce some craziness. But at the same time, if you have, depending upon the type of leader that you have, some leaders, like you can squelch an artistic person. Like one of the guys who's here, he's an artist 100%.
Yeah.
Like I don't always understand what he's saying because he's speaking in art, right?
Sure.
And he's just an artist. And so if you give that person like too many constraints, you'll choke the art out of them.
Right.
And then when you're asking them, hey, go be who God's created you to be, there's nothing, you've choked it out of them. But at the same time, on the flip side of the coin, you want them to be prepared for what God is going to bring their way. And so that's where for us, the best way that we try to do that, and this is still, I feel like we're still in a lab.
Yeah.
Like we are 100% still in a lab. We'll be in a lab for the next 100 years, but definitely we're in like the embryonic stage of a lab of the House LA, at least, for the next couple of years as we're kind of like working on systems. But for us, the DNA part is one of the most important things because DNA, you can let it run wild and you already know it's going to reproduce. It may reproduce it different, but it's going to reproduce it.
Yeah, that's right. That's really good. So like when you're talking about the context of community at the House LA, really it's these groups. Like groups would be a big deal. Like, Hollywood.
That's actually
get down.
We haven't heard one helicopter, and so I'm like, we're doing great.
Exactly.
You know, when you're really local is when you can hear the difference of that's a news helicopter or that's a police helicopter.
Oh, for real? You can discern that.
News helicopter, it's not discernment, it's just straight up. News helicopters hover, police go, they go in circles.
Oh, that's awesome.
They're hunting somebody down.
Yeah,
So.
That's great. I hope I never have to know that.
Groups. You asked about groups.
Yeah, so groups are a pretty big part of your church, like home group kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so we started as a Connect group.
Okay.
We were only a couple months in, and at that time we call just like, hey, we're going to do family dinners, and it was for us. It was a soft launch of Connect groups. It's like we just want people to get used to the idea of going to someone's house for dinner. Which the older people were like, great, we know this. The younger people were like, wait, you want not a coffee shop in someone's home?
Right.
And that was like a bit of a hurdle for some people. And they were like,
totally.
Not just in their home, but for a couple weeks in a row. Like, I can't get that consistency thing.
Totally.
But for us, it's like, hey, if we really want to get the gospel out, there is a decentralization that must happen.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to be the only one holding the keys to the kingdom.
That's good.
I don't want to be the only guy with a Bible in our church. We got to get this out in the community.
Yeah, it's really good.
And so the best part that we can do, like in Ephesians 4:11-16, is we can use what we have, leverage what God's given us to make you better. I want to leverage everything God's given me to make you a better leader so that when you're in your normal world, you can be a missionary, you can be an example for Christ.
Yeah.
You can help lead someone. You may not know a phrase we use often. You may not be a level 10, you may be a level 2, but someone is at a level 0 and they're praying to God, send me someone who can show me level 1.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's good. And so now talk to me, because I know just based off of your language, your word choice, like that culture is a big deal for you, and that creating, not just changing culture, but really creating. And I'll be interested to hear kind of your word choice for it. But how are you in our word choice in our context of worship? We use the word wineskin a lot. We're really for our leadership kind of culture. So what kind of wineskin do you guys have, and how are you really kind of assimilating people into kind of this kingdom philosophy for not just a belief structure, but how you're actually going to do life together with Jesus from this point forward? What does that actually look like?
Well, the first thing for me was I had to get over as a leader that not everyone's going to look like me.
Okay.
I'm not just talking about the color of my skin or my age. I'm just talking like they may communicate in a different language. They may communicate in English, but in a different language of English.
Yeah, totally.
They may communicate at a different time. Like, let's say I like hanging out at 7 p.m. They like hanging out at midnight. And I have to be okay with that, because the goal is not that they would look like me or do it in the exact framework that I would do it, but that it's the same reproduction, it's the same DNA. And so for us, from the very jump, from the very get-go as a church, we've always used the language, instead of we believe, we use the language of we are.
Okay,
And so this is who we are.
Yeah.
And so it's communicating that DNA from the very beginning. And this is something, I didn't create this. This is, Pastors Brian and Bobby Houston. This is Pastors Wendell and Jenny. This is Pastor Judah and Chelsea. I'm just literally taking all their stuff.
Awesome.
And
absolutely.
Hey, man, who we are is the most important thing. And it's like, I'm putting Wes Dunn spin on it.
Yeah.
But I didn't create it.
No, it's
right?
awesome. These
are the great giants and generals who have gone before us. But we use this language of this is who we are. We are Jesus based. We are spirit-led. We are deeply generous. We are outwardly focused. We are living sustainably. We have these 7 kind of statements of this is who we are. And everything flows from that. But now for me as a leader going, okay, as we, and we progressively teach those things. So we have something that's our first thing. It's called Open House. And we may change the name. We'll figure it out. But it's more of the answering the question, are we family? Like, is this... Because if we're family, like if there's a spirit of like, hey, I think I'm supposed to be here, then let's take it to the next step.
Cool.
The next step is how do we function? And that's where we talk about like prayer and Bible, the basic Christian disciplines. Where we talk about baptism, where we talk about like here's the integrate like the rhythms of community.
Sure.
And then and then we'll probably add in a third one, and then the fourth one is a leaders class where we go dive into those pillars. We call them our 7 pillars, and it's essentially it's doctrine.
Yeah.
Where each pillar is like, and there's an introduction of why doctrine is even important. So it's like one full class, why is doctrine important? 7 classes after that of here's why each doctrine, and we literally lay them out. We don't just talk about when we talk about generosity, we don't just talk about Malachi 3. We go all the way back to Abraham, and we walk all the way through Jesus. We walk through the first church.
Awesome.
When we talk about outwardly focused, we don't just talk about the things that we do, but this is who we are. And so, so for us, it's like I as a pastor, one of the things I want to do, or as a leader, just as a Christian, as a human, I want to help create other leaders that can run so far. That they can reproduce that DNA of our church is inside them.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so Doug Fields, I remember I read this book way long ago. It's about about youth ministry, and he was Rick Warren's youth pastor for forever. But he said, I remember he said this phrase. He says, I want to raise up youth leaders that if they move to another city and there's not a youth ministry there, that they'll start one.
Wow.
And it's like, oh man, like that capture. It's not like I don't want to just create great leaders who know how to pass the bucket when the prayer's done being prayed, or know how to play the song and strum the strings at the right notes. But like I want to raise a leader who can be that in the language that we would use, like the spiritual mothers and fathers. And that what the strength in my opinion, sorry, like you got me like I'm on a rant or a preach.
Go, you're doing great.
But the strength of any community is not the numbers of people. In my opinion, the strength of a community is on the numbers of spiritual mothers and fathers in that community.
Wow.
Because spiritual mothers and fathers, they lead a different way. They make sure that the sons and the daughters are safe. They raise up sons and daughters in the house. But people don't start out as mothers and fathers. They start out as sons and daughters. And so everyone goes through that process of just being a child, of God, to being a son of God, to being like a father in the faith. And so, so for our heart is like, God, bring us, at the beginning, it's like, God, bring us some mothers and fathers, because we want to jumpstart this thing. But also, God, and my prayer is, God, help me to be a good dad, not only to my 2 kids, but to this community of like, help me to like, and not in a dad sense of like a putting people down. That's kind of like, I if people don't use this language, forgive me, that they were like, wow, this just got weird quick. But help me to be a good leader, to raise people up. Absolutely. To encourage them, to finance them, to what do I need to do? So like, what's in your heart? How do I make that happen? Yeah. That's good language.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I noticed with like with true spiritual mothers and fathers is they never lose their sonship. So like, I even think of just Jesus. Yeah. Jesus, he's always a good example, you know, like he entered into ministry through that place of sonship. Yeah. Right. So like when he was baptized, like that was kind of his public ordination, and he heard his father say, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." Yeah. And so in that place of sonship, he modeled perfect ministry and discipleship and empowerment and all of that. Right. Yeah. So I think of like some of the most incredible, so my pastor, who transitioned the church over to me, was a divorced woman who the Assemblies of God gave her a credential. Wow. And at that time in the Northwest, that's a big deal. She was the only divorced woman lead pastor in the Assemblies. And
in the nation.
No, in our district. Okay. In our district. And so that was really like that was amazing. But she came back to restore and to rebuild, kind of a Nehemiah mandate within our within our church. So people start coming to the church. They love her heart. They love her vision. Wow. The God's spoken to her about me, and the Lord hasn't even spoken to me about me. You know,
that's the best.
I haven't even come back to the church yet.
That's like spiritual moms and dads. They see it. They're like, I already know what's gonna happen. Yeah. And you're like, I don't see it. Like, it's okay.
So when I do end up coming back to the church, and I do end up hearing from God several years later, she's like, "Yep, I know, the elders know, we've been waiting for you to hear from the Lord."
Come on.
But then what she did, like, this is so incredible to me. She's rebuilt the church from 20 people up to a core group of around 120, 130 people. And they're there because they love her. They love her vision. And I think a lot of people are like, I don't know about Darren, right? We're here because of her. But she used her influence. She used her heart and everything, and she honored me. And we were supposed to. The assembly said that we were going to lose about 20% of our church, because that's pretty typical with the transition. Not to worry, the church will begin to grow with kind of the new DNA of the leader. We didn't lose anyone, and it was because of how she postured herself. So she went from being a spiritual mom, being an overseer in the house, to stepping back into a place of sonship. Which was incredible. Like she took off for a while, gave me room, gave our team room, and then came back into the church as a son. And to me, and I've seen this
what a hero.
Yeah, it's absolutely like when I think of the apostolic, when I think of the Apostle Paul, who would go, who would build, and then like die to their own work, and then disappear, and then would write these letters. Hey, I'm concerned. I'm holding in my heart, and would address things. But and that's one of the things I've seen over and over and over again from spiritual mothers and fathers is they know how, they never lose that place of sonship. And what you said, that's so true. I love that you said this, is that the only way that we can really step into a place of being a spiritual mother or father is that we first have to become spiritual sons and daughters. Yeah. And you're modeling that. I mean, just with with your testimony of the deep roots at City Church and now Church Home, and this place of loyalty and honor, and how the Lord has synergized that in order for you guys to have a healthy home where there can be multiplication and sons and daughters can come up there. So I think it's awesome. It's such an awesome testimony, such a cool thing of what you're modeling.
Well, very grateful. Honestly, we're very grateful for the heritage, where it's like, God, thank you for writing me in the story.
Yeah.
And that heritage for us was part of our call here to LA, where it's like, hey, that's that same mantle, we have that from heaven. And so,
because I think on the contrast, right? and I think this is important to hit on, especially for people that are listening. In the contrast, you can have ministries and churches that aren't launched from a culture of honor. Yeah. It's almost like they're launched from almost a culture of pride and jealousy.
Yeah.
So if
reaction.
So if I'm a part of your assembly and work, and every time you're preaching, I'm like, I could do better than this.
Yeah.
Like if he's doing it, I could do it.
Right.
And there can be that place sometimes, Mm-hmm. So I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it better. Yeah. And then I think some ways that we can discern those environments is when we're having conversations, and it's like, and it's like the problem with the church, or the problem, and that's coming from. So I think it's so cool. One of the things about counterfeits, right, is when like people that study counterfeits, they don't study the fake.
Yeah, they study the real.
Sorry,
I'm like preaching, but I'm like, yes.
Do it. Dive in. So we don't have to talk about all the ways to identify the fake. It's like like looking at this story.
Yeah.
This testimony. It's such a great way to be able to discern if you're not in a healthy environment, or if you're in an environment that could be going a wrong direction.
Yeah.
Listening to the language, listening to the trying to pick up on that frequency of honor. Mm-hmm. So,
and I realize that not everyone has that same story that we do. Like, there's probably someone who's listening to this is like, okay, I didn't have a pastors Wendell and Jenny in my life.
Right, totally.
I didn't have a pastor Judah and Chelsea. I didn't have a pastor Jude and Becky, which is like, wow, that sounds great, but also you have lots of eyes in your life. So there's also the flip side of that. Yeah. But it's like, hey, maybe they didn't have that. And so I really believe that someone can be like a spiritual father or mother from far away. So I've met Bishop Jakes one time. I met him one time. I had the opportunity to...
Did you shake his hand?
I think so.
What hand was it?
I think it was his hand. No.
Rub my hand. Talk about just getting weird.
Yeah. People were like, what just happened?
I think there's some Jake's residual...
But honestly, he's mentored me from afar.
Yeah, that's cool.
Like
that's cool.
His cadence in his preaching and his stories, and how open he is and how willing he is to go there. He's mentored me from afar.
That's awesome.
Or there's other pastors and preachers here in LA that I'm like, where I'm like, man, the depth that person goes through. Sister Amy Simple McPherson, she's with Jesus, but she has mentored me.
That's awesome.
And, as like a woman before women's suffrage here, she drives across America, like preaching the gospel. She starts the Foursquare Church. Well, women can't even vote. She's like, I'm going to start one of the nation's greatest churches. She has mentored me from afar. So I realize not everyone has those things, but it's like, man, or someone could be in a small town. It's like, hey, you know what? Pastor Craig Rochelle, he mentors me. I've never met him, but I listen to his leadership podcast over and over. I'll send it out to our team. This is so good. He encourages me. He inspires me. He mentors me from afar.
That's awesome. What a great point. What a great point. That when we honor someone, we open up our heart to be influenced
absolutely
by them, and you don't have to have relationship with someone to be mentored by them.
You can honestly, Pastor Dick Iverson, the late Pastor Dick Iverson, he launched this thing called MFI Ministers Fellowship International. He used to say, hey, you can drink water from any spring that's clean.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah.
And so there's people like when they think about, oh man, I need a pastor. And for them, what they think of is I need to sit down with you. I need to pour out my soul to you.
Yeah.
We need to have coffee. You need to pay for it.
Right.
This needs to happen. This needs to happen. This needs to happen. This needs to happen. And then you're going to follow up with me. You are going to keep me accountable.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's like, really? Like, wait, what kind of weak version of leadership is that? Like, no, like I go to you, I'm going to follow, where are you going?
Right.
I'm going to be there.
Right.
How can I be a part of that? Can I listen to your podcast? Because I can still receive from that. And so
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And you're awesome, Wes. And thanks for creating time in your schedule.
Thank you so much.
And bringing some of your community over to come hang out. And we're excited about what Jesus is doing. We'll put the link in the show notes for the House LA.
Thank you so much.
And we'd encourage everybody to go and check it out, even if you don't live in the LA area, because you can really support these guys, be praying for these guys, these missionaries to LA, and you guys are doing it right. Hey, God bless you, Wes, and
thank you so much.
Thanks for doing this.